That horse was just about done, and Elias could feel it in his own tired hands. They'd been chasing the sun south for 6 long weeks, with nothing to show for it. The Arizona Territory was a mean old place, baking the ground into a cracked skillet. The air itself tasted like hot dust and iron. Elias felt as dried out as a piece of jerky, his throat lined with grit. His pale eyes were just plain weary of looking at all that emptiness. Then, cresting a low hill, he finally saw it. Barren Ridge. It was less of a town and more of a scar on the land. Just a few sad buildings huddled beneath a giant fist of red rock. A mess of tents nearby told him it was a place for hard men. He knew its purpose: bad whiskey, stolen cattle, and quick funerals. Elias wanted no trouble, but his supply bags were flatter than a pancake. He needed food, but more than anything, he just needed to stop moving for a night. He nudged his horse forward, stirring up clouds of fine, pale dust. A few fellows watched him from the shade, looking too tired to be a threat. He ignored the peeling paint on the offices and aimed right for the livery stable. The fellow who ran it was a kid, no older than a teenager, a place to buy rustled cattle and bury folks who got too curious. Elias wanted no part of it, but his supply bags were bone-dry empty. He was down to needing flour, coffee, and a bottle of something strong. Something to wash away the last 500 miles of trail dust. More than anything, he just needed to be still for one single night. His horse sighed as it plodded onto the town's main street. The street was axle-deep in pale dust that puffed up with every step. A few fellows watched him pass from the shade of the Mercantile. They looked like tired prospectors, their faces hidden by their hats. They seemed too worn out to cause any trouble, he reckoned. A blacksmith's hammer rang out a lonely, steady rhythm. He passed a land office with peeling paint and a barber shop. The barber offered hot baths for 50 cents. Elias stopped at the livery first. A boy, no older than 16, with a weathered face, took the reins. "Just water and feed for them," Elias said, his voice all rust and gravel. "Keep them inside, out of the sun." "Yes, sir, that'll be $2. Elias pulled a worn leather pouch from his saddlebag and paid the boy. He handed over the coins without looking back at his horse. It was just easier that way. The hot afternoon sun beat down on him. He needed a real meal and a stiff drink, that was for sure. He spotted a saloon sign across the street, swinging on one hinge. The Gilded Scorpion. A bad piano tune drifted out from inside. He could also hear shouting from what sounded like a sour card game. Elias pulled his hat low and pushed through the swinging doors. Inside, the air was hot, thick, and smelled of stale beer. It was a mix of sweat, tobacco smoke, and cheap, sweet perfume. It was mighty busy for a weekday, full of miners and loud cattlemen. And then there were the other kind of men, the ones who lived by the gun. He paid them no mind and moved to the darkest corner he could find. He took a chair that put his back to the wall. It was an old, hard habit. A woman appeared through the thick saloon smoke. She cleaned a table in a plain, worn-out calico dress. Its color was a faded gray, her hair like dark honey. A few loose strands clung to her damp neck. When she faced him, he understood why she was there. She was beautiful, but it was a beauty that had been through the ringer. You could see a certain grace in her features, her jawline. She looked like she came from better folks, but her eyes were old. They were the color of a bruised twilight sky. Her exhaustion was so deep you could almost feel it. She was like a fine racehorse hitched to a coal wagon. She grabbed her rag and a tray and walked to his table. "Whiskey," Elias said quietly. She just nodded, her eyes downcast. "Bottle or glass?" Her voice was low and plum-tired. "Glass, and a steak, if the cook ain't sideways." "He's always sideways," she said without looking up. "But he can find the skillet." She walked away, moving slow. Elias watched the men at the bar eye her like hungry coyotes. She had a way of moving right through their stares, though, like she was a ghost in her own life. Elias saw it all. He wasn't like them fellas. He was quiet, covered in trail dust. His gear was cared for, and his pistol wasn't for show. The grip was worn smooth from use, not sitting in a holster. He took a sip of the whiskey she brought, a clean, hot fire. She figured he was a man used to being alone, and he looked like a man who knew how to finish things. She went back to pulling beers and dodging trouble. The clumsy hands of drunks reached for her waist. She swayed away with a practiced mooch, a sad little dance. His steak came tough as leather, but it was hot food. Elias ate slow and steady, his eyes scanning the room. He marked the exits, the faces, and any iron being worn. He wasn't one to start a fuss, but he could smell it coming. And sure enough, trouble decided to pay a visit. The doors of the Gilded Scorpion slammed open hard. They crashed against the walls and the piano went silent. All the loud talk just died. Three men filled the doorway. These weren't ranch hands. They were the kind who just take. They wore their grit and grime like a second skin. Their gun belts were slung low, tied down and ready. The one in front was big, with a face like splintered wood. His little black eyes scanned the room, mean and hungry. His name was Harkin. He was the muscle for the man who owned that valley. "Where is she?" Harkin growled. The nervous bartender just jerked his chin toward the back. "Clara!" Harkin hollered. "Get on out here now! We're leaving!" Clara walked out from the storeroom, her arms full of glasses. The moment she saw them, she froze solid. It was more than just fear. It was pure terror, the kind a rabbit feels just before a hawk strikes. The glasses in her hands started to shake and rattle. "I told you, Harkin," she said, her voice trembling. "I ain't going back. I'm paid up." Harkin just laughed. It was an ugly sound. He walked right toward her. "You ain't ever paid up. Luther says you're his property. And he wants his property back." He crossed the room and grabbed her. "You belong to Luther Ray," Clara cried out in pain. She tried to pull free, but his grip was like iron. "Let go of me." "You're nothing but what he says you are," Harkin sneered. Then he started dragging her to the door, and Elias just watched. A sour feeling churned in his stomach, the kind that comes from trouble. This was not his fight, and this sure was not his town. He had his own demons to wrestle, and no room for hers. He learned a long time ago that stepping in only got good people hurt. He learned it the night his brother, Daniel, was strung up from a cottonwood tree. All over a fight Elias had started. He would just finish his drink and leave. But Lord, that woman was fighting. She was not screaming for help. She fought like a cornered wildcat, kicking and clawing at Harkin. Harkin's hand cracked across her face. The sound echoed, sharp and ugly. It was not a slap. It was a blow meant to break something. Clara fell back, tasting her own blood as the room started to spin. Harkin grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back. And that is when Clara saw him, the quiet stranger watching from the corner. In the corner, a man with dead gray eyes watched. He didn't look with pity, not like the other men. He just watched, still as a stone. He was her only chance, a real long shot. In a blind panic, Clara wrenched herself free. She didn't run for the door or the bar. She ran right at Elias, stumbling into him. She landed hard in his lap, knocking the wind from him. She was all sharp bones and trembling fear. She smelled of cheap soap, whiskey, and blood. Her arms locked his neck. The whole saloon went still. Elias froze solid, his hands pinned beneath her. He felt her heart pound like a trapped bird. Harkin stopped, his face a mess of confusion and rage. "What in the hell?" he growled. Clara whispered in Elias's ear. Her whole body was shaking something terrible. It was not a plea, it was a dying woman's command. "Pretend I am with you tonight," she begged him. Elias stared over her head, straight at Harkin. The world had shrunk down to that one table. He felt the cold colt on his hip. He wanted no part of this. But Harkin took a step forward, his hand dropping. "Mister, that is Luther Ray's property on your lap. I suggest you move her." Elias did not budge an inch. His gaze was flat, gray, and empty as the plains. Slowly he brought his right hand up to her waist. It was a claim. Clara flinched from his touch, but she pressed herself closer, hiding her face. "The lady's with me," Elias said, his voice like gravel. The air in the room went tight as a bowstring. Harkin's two men spread out, their hands hovering over their iron. The other folks in the Gilded Scorpion tried to become part of the walls. Harkin's thick neck was turning a blotchy, angry red. "You don't know who you're tangling with, friend." Elias cut him off. "I heard you," he said, his voice steady and low. "She's with me tonight." He was giving Harkin a chance to walk away with his pride, an off-ramp from a bad road. But Harkin was too stubborn to take it. She ain't got a mind of her own. She's got Luther's brand. Now give her up, or I'll draw on you right where you sit. Brand, the word was ugly. Clara's nails dug into Elias's shoulders. But Elias wasn't looking at Harkin. He was looking at the two men beside him. He measured the distance. He sized them up. He counted the heartbeats in the silence. Then you had better draw, Elias said. Silence. The man on the left nervously licked his lips. Harkin's hand was clenched on his pistol, but he didn't pull it. He had come looking for a girl, not to die in a gunfight, not against a man who looked like he had nothing at all to lose. Harkin stared for 10 long seconds. He saw the cold calm in Elias's eyes. That complete lack of fear made his own blood run cold. This was no cowboy. This is not over, Harkin spat, finally pulling his hand from his gun. Luther will send men. He will send a whole army for you both. He pointed a thick, trembling finger at Elias. You just bought yourself a ticket to the grave, mister. He turned and stomped out, his men right behind him, looking relieved. The swinging doors flapped wildly in the sudden quiet. The saloon held its breath for a long moment. Then the low murmur of life slowly returned. A cough, a quiet order for another whiskey. Clara was still in his lap, shaking so hard he could feel it in his bones. All the fight had drained right out of her. They're gone, Elias said softly. All right now, ma'am, Elias said, his voice low and steady. She finally pushed herself up, her whole body trembling. She stood with her head bowed, too ashamed to look at him. A trickle of blood ran down her chin. Thank you, she whispered. Elias saw the dark bruise already forming on her cheek. He could see the pure terror still swimming in her eyes. She wrapped her arms around herself, just trying to hold it all together. You best get your things, Elias said, standing up from his chair. He tossed a few coins on the table to cover his meal. Clara looked up, her eyes wide with confusion. My things? Men like that, he said. They'll be back tonight with friends. He knew this kind of trouble didn't just walk away on its own. But I don't have anywhere else to go, she stammered. Elias rubbed his tired face, feeling a wave of anger. He was mad at the world, but mostly at himself for getting involved. Is there somewhere private we can talk? He asked, his voice rough. She nodded, biting her lip. The storeroom. She led him to a small closet smelling of damp earth and spilled beer. Inside, a single flickering lamp pushed back the darkness. What's your real name? He asked quietly. She hesitated. It's Clara. My name doesn't matter. It matters to them, Elias said. So who is Luther Ray? He owns this whole valley, she explained, her voice shaking. The ranch, the law. He thinks he owns me, too. And does he? Elias looked her straight in the eye. A spark of defiance returned to her gaze. No, not ever. So you're hiding here, he stated more than asked. I ran, she said simply, for 3 long months. I thought I was far enough away. I thought I was finally safe. She spoke of the ranch not as a home, but as a gilded cage. She was like property, running from a place she could never go back to. She gave him a fake name, but kept her real one hidden. In the dim light, Elias saw the fresh bruises Harkin had left. He also saw older, faded marks that weren't from working in a saloon. The fear in her eyes was more than just fear of a beating. It was the fear of being trapped in a cage. I don't want trouble, Elias said, but it felt like a lie. I'm just passing through. I need supplies and a night's rest. Then you ought to go, Clara whispered, tears cutting paths through the dirt on her face. Get your horse and ride. Don't let them see you. I'm not worth your life, mister. The name's Elias, he said quietly. Elias, she repeated the name. You've done more for me than anyone ever has. Now please go. He knew he should have turned and walked right out that door. He should have got his horse and just disappeared into the night. He was good at forgetting, at leaving trouble in his dust. But when he looked at her bruises, he saw his own brother's face. He remembered all the people he couldn't protect, all the fights he'd lost. Without a word, he just nodded and walked back into the saloon. Clara watched him, a cold dread settling deep in her gut. She thought he had listened, that he was leaving for good. But Elias didn't head for the stable. He went right back to his table. He sat down, his back to the wall, ordered another whiskey, and waited. Clara went back to work, her hands shaking so bad she could hardly pour a drink. The saloon owner, a man named Hobbs, hissed at her. "You brought trouble here, girl. You fix this, or you're out." "It's fixed," she lied. The night wore on, the clock ticking past 10, then 11. The saloon slowly emptied until it was just Elias, Hobbs, and Clara. "We're closing up," Hobbs grumbled, wiping the bar. Elias didn't move an inch. "You hear me, mister?" Just then the back door was kicked clean off its hinges, wood splintering everywhere. It wasn't 3 men this time. It was 6. Harkin was in front, his face a mask of cold fury. He was not drunk, just cold sober and ready for a fight. "We're taking her," Harkin growled, as his men threw Hobbs over the bar. 2 more lunged for Clara, and she let out a raw, tearing scream. She threw a bottle, but it missed, shattering against the far wall. Then Harkin and another man went for Elias, but he was already moving. He kicked the heavy table over, crashing it right into Harkin's legs. The other man raised his pistol. A gunshot roared in the small room. But it was not from Elias's gun. Clara screamed again. Elias looked down. A burning, searing pain tore through his side. A dark stain was already blooming across his shirt. Gritting his teeth, he raised his own pistol and fired. He did not shoot the man who shot him. He shot the one closest to Clara. The man went down howling, clutching a shattered knee. Harkin shoved the table aside, drawing his gun. But Elias was faster. He dove over the bar, pulling Clara down behind it with him. Another shot rang out, splintering the wood where his head had just been. "Get to the back room, Clara!" Elias roared, his own blood hot and sticky. He fired over the bar. A man hollered. "This way, Elias," Clara cried, pulling his good arm. They stumbled into the storeroom as Harkin's men burst in. "Look, a window," Clara said, pointing high on the wall. "You go," Elias yelled, turning to face the door. "I am not leaving you. Now go." He pushed her towards some barrels. She scrambled up, her hands fumbling with the window latch. The door flew open. Harkin stood there, pistol raised. Both men fired. Elias felt a bullet tear through his sleeve. He saw Harkin stumble back, surprised but not hit. With the window now open, Elias emptied his gun. 2 shots drove them back from the doorway. He pulled himself up, his wounded side screaming, and fell through. He fell from the window into the alley. Clara saw the wound. "You are shot." "A scratch," he lied, his vision failing. "My horse," he gasped. "The delivery." They ran from shouts and gunfire. She trembled, but held his arm. They burst into the livery, waking a boy. "My horse!" Elias kicked the stall. His bloody hands fumbled the saddle. "They are coming," Clara cried. He could not work the cinch. He swayed. Clara shoved him aside. "Hold him." Her hands were fast. She secured the saddle. "Get on." He tried to mount, but his leg failed. He fell back. "I cannot do it." She saw his blood, then the closing shadows. "You will ride," she said firmly. She hauled him onto the horse. He found the stirrup, groaning. He swayed in the saddle. "Clara, go!" She jumped up right behind him. "Ride!" she screamed, holding his waist. He kicked the horse and it bolted. They scattered Harkin's men. Their bullets flew wide in the dark. They thundered out of barren ridge. They vanished into the desert. Clara clung to him, trembling. He gripped the reins, his side on fire. Elias was furious. His quiet night was shattered. His supplies were gone. He was 1,000 miles from nowhere, with a stranger's life in his hands. They rode the horse until it was shaking, always pointing north. He kept them off the main trails, pushing into the broken country. The land was nothing but baked earth and thorns. He ran on pure grit, one hand clamped to the wound in his side. His other hand held tightly to the reins. Clara clung to him from behind, not saying a word. Her arms were locked around his waist, her face buried in his shirt. She could feel the warm, sticky dampness of his blood soaking through. Every single jolt of the horse sent a new wave of pain through him. She felt it in the tight line of his back, in his sharp breaths. She was terrified of the men behind them, but had a bigger fear. She was more terrified that this man in front of her was about to die. He rode for hours, long past midnight, until the dawn started to break. He was swaying in the saddle, and the horse was stumbling under their weight. "We have to stop," Clara finally whispered. "You're bleeding. You are bleeding far too much." Elias did not respond. He was scanning the landscape, his eyes searching the shadows. Then he found what he was looking for, a deep cut in the earth, a dry riverbed lined with trees. It was a place to hide. He guided the exhausted horse down the sandy bank. Once they were 20 yards in, hidden from view, Elias stopped the horse. He tried to swing his leg over the saddle to get down, but when his weight hit his left side, his leg just buckled. A raw groan tore from his chest as he fell to his knees in the soft sand. Clara slid off the horse and ran to him, crying out, "Elias!" He was on all fours, his head hanging, his body shaking. "The horse," he gritted out. "Give the horse some water." Panicked, Clara fumbled with the canteen on the saddle. Before she unfastened the cinch on the heavy saddle, when she pulled it off, the horse gratefully nibbled at the dry grass. She turned back to Elias. He had rolled onto his back. His arm was over his face and his shirt was soaked dark red. "I have to see that wound," she said, her voice trembling. "Leave it," he rasped. "You'll die," she insisted, refusing to lose him. She grabbed his shirt and ripped it upward. He cursed in pain. He was just too weak to stop her from helping. The dim saloon light had hidden how bad it truly was. The bullet went in clean, high on his side, but tore deep. It was an ugly wound, still bleeding in the morning light. "Oh, my Lord," she whispered. "It went clean through," Elias muttered. "Just tie it up." Clara looked at her simple calico dress. It was all she had. With a determined cry, she tore a wide strip from her skirt. Then she tore another, just to be sure. She used a little precious water to clean the wound. Elias went stiff, hissing through his teeth from the sharp pain. He stayed quiet through the pain. Clara worked fast, her fear gone cold. She knew her way around a bad wound from her ranch days. She folded a strip of cloth, making a thick pad for the bleeding. She pressed it firm and tied the rest tight around his middle. He grunted, squeezing his eyes shut as she pulled it taut. "There," she whispered, her voice shaking. Elias finally looked. Her dress was torn, her face a mess of his blood and her tears. Her hair had come undone, falling all around her shoulders. That's when he saw the awful bruise on her cheek. He had taken a bullet for this. He could not bear to look away. He just stared up at that big, empty Texas sky. "We can't stay, but we can't move," she said. "You're half gone." He was too tired to argue. A deep chill settled right into Clara's bones. The rising sun brought no warmth. She was alone, hunted, with a bleeding man. They had nothing. No food, just a half-empty canteen. Her thin saloon slippers were already torn to shreds. Elias had lost everything. His mule, his supplies, all of it. All he had left was the pistol on his hip. He'd given his bedroll to her right before he collapsed. "No fire," he'd ordered. "Stay low." She huddled in the wool, smelling leather, dust, and his blood. He shivered in the cold, his face slick with fever. Once he slept, she tried to cover him with the blanket. He woke instantly, grabbing her wrist with a grip like iron. His eyes were open, lucid, and cold as stone. "Don't," he rasped, shoving the bedroll off. "The fever needs the cold." "But you're freezing," she cried. "Your skin and bones, you'll freeze first," he told her. "Take it. Don't argue." She pulled the blanket around her shoulders. Soon the sun was high, baking the arroyo with a fierce heat. "They'll follow our tracks," she whispered, watching the ridge. "Let 'em," Elias said, propped against the sandy bank. His face was gray, but his eyes were clear. "The wash hides tracks. They'll be looking for us on the road. And we ain't it on the road." "Who are you, Sam?" she asked, her voice small. "Why did you help me?" Elias looked at his hands, scraped raw from the fall. "I didn't. I just got in the way." His gaze sharpened. "Now you talk. I'm bleeding for a story I don't know. I reckon I've earned it. Who is Luther Ray? And why did he send 6 men to get you?" Clara pulled her knees to her chest, staring at the dry creek bed. "My name is Clara Waywright," she began. "I am from Missouri. My folks died from cholera a couple of years back. My uncle Horace was the one who took me in after that. He was a weak man. He had good river land, but he loved drinking and gambling more. He gambled himself into a deep hole, a debt he owed to Luther Ray. One day Luther came to our house. I was just 18. He is a big man, wears fine clothes, but he stinks like a slaughterhouse. He told my uncle the debt would be wiped clean, and he would even get a new land claim. All my uncle had to do was give me to him. And he did it, Elias. He sold me. He signed a piece of paper. He called it an indenture, said I would be his housekeeper for 5 years. That was a lie. I was not a housekeeper. I was just his. He keeps other young women on his ranch, and he calls us all his property. His men, like that fella Harkin, they stand guard and do whatever he says. I was trapped there for a whole year. I tried to run away once last winter. They caught me and dragged me back 3 days later. Luther looked at me and said, "Property that runs needs a mark." "So everyone knows who it belongs to," he said. Her voice went cold. He held me down himself, with Harkin's help. He used his own personal branding iron on me. She turned and pulled her dress down just enough to show him her shoulder. Elias had seen his share of scars, but he had never seen anything like this. It was not a crude brand for cattle or a horse. It was a letter, an elegant swirling R, for Ray. It was small, no bigger than a man's thumb, but it was perfect. A custom iron, made special for its terrible purpose. It was a mark of ownership, delicate and foul, burned into her skin forever. The scar told the whole ugly story. He had not just hurt her, he had signed his name on her. Elias felt a cold rage settle deep in his bones. He knew then that Luther Ray's time was running out. The tissue was a raised white scar. A cold sickness rose in his throat. It was a black rage, an old fury from his youth. The kind of fury that had gotten his brother killed, aimed at men who just take. Men who believe the whole world is theirs for the breaking. Clara pulled her dress back up. She kept her back to him. "I waited," she said, her voice muffled. "I waited 3 long months. I smiled and did everything he said. I made him believe I was broken. Then one night I just ran. I stole a kitchen knife, a little food, and I took off into the night. I ended up down in Barren Ridge. I figured he wouldn't look for me that far south." She finally turned, her eyes full of desperation. "He will never stop looking for me. That is why you have to leave. He will take your life just for being with me, for what you saw." Elias looked from her bruised face to where the scar was now hidden. He thought of the cruel men back in Harkin, but he said nothing. He did not tell her about Daniel or the railroad or the land he lost. He did not say that her story felt like a piece of his own soul. Instead, he just stared out at the flat horizon. "I ain't leaving you," he said, his voice flat and final. "We can't. We're going to a place called Drywell," he said, cutting her off. "It's 2 days north. I know a man there, Jedediah. He's good at making people disappear. He can get you on a train heading east." Elias gritted his teeth and tried to stand. Clara was right there to help him. "You are in no shape to ride," she pleaded. "And we are in no shape to stay," he countered. "They will find this camp by noon. We ride slow, but we ride now." The next 2 days were nothing but a haze of sun and grit and pain. They walked more than they rode, saving the horse's strength. Elias was a silent, grim shadow, his face a mask of pure agony. He'd ride for an hour, then walk, with one hand pressed hard against his side. Clara kept pace beside him, her worn-out shoes falling to pieces on the sharp rocks. On the second afternoon, they entered a narrow, rocky pass in the foothills. Clara searched the rocks for a place to rest, then stopped. "Elias, what is that?" It was a sound like dry seeds in a gourd, a sound that didn't belong. A high, steady buzz. Elias went still as a statue, his eyes scanning the ground. "Don't you move a muscle," he whispered, his voice tight. She saw it then, coiled in the shade not 5 feet away. It was a huge diamondback, as thick as a strong man's arm. Its head was raised, its tail a blur. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. She couldn't even breathe. "Clara," Elias said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "I'm going to walk to your left. When I do, you take one big step back." "I can't," she whimpered. "Yes, you can," he said, moving, silent as a ghost. The snake's head turned, tracking him. That rattle grew louder, angrier. "Now," Elias commanded. Clara stumbled backward, falling to the ground. In that same instant, Elias moved. He didn't reach for his gun. He shoved her. He pushed her hard, sending her sprawling away from the danger. He took the very spot where she had been standing, and the snake struck. Elias yelled out as the snake hit him, but he had his knife in his hand. Clara hadn't even seen him draw it. He stabbed down, pinning the snake's head. The blade sank deep into the rocky ground. The snake's body coiled around his leg, but he held it firm, ending the fight in a matter of seconds. The snake went limp. Elias was breathing hard as Clara scrambled to his side. "Elias, it got you!" she cried. His boot was torn right open. A long scratch on his ankle was beaded with blood and shiny venom. "No," he grunted, shaking his head. "It just grazed me. The fangs hit the leather." Clara didn't listen. She grabbed his canteen and knelt down beside him. She poured the last of their precious water over the wound, washing it clean. "Clara, dang it, that was all our—" "Be quiet," she snapped. Tearing another strip from her ruined skirt, she wiped the cut gently. It was bleeding, but it was just a shallow slice. There were no puncture marks. The fangs had only scraped him. She sat back on her heels, trembling. He had done it again. He had placed himself between her and death. He stood over her, breathing hard. Her hair was a wild, dusty mess. She looked up with grateful eyes. The desert around them went quiet. The tension was no longer just fear. It was something new, something hot. He saw her, not just the job. A woman with a fire like his own. She saw him not as a savior, but a man just as broken. He broke the spell, his face hardened. He grabbed the snake. "We eat this." He walked to the horse, leaving her on. They reached Drywell the next day. It was a heartbreaking sight. Jed's cabin was a smoking ruin. Only the chimney was left standing. The air smelled of soot. "No, Clara came and stood beside him. "This is Jed's place," she whispered. He knew he was already too late. He called Jed's name. The ashes felt warm. He found the body near the creek. It was Jed, shot in the back. Clara pointed at the ground, shaking. Prints from 6 horses were in the ash. Elias found a shell from a new rifle. "Luther's men," she breathed in terror. How could they have known? Elias knew. He had led them here. He knew then. They weren't just after Clara. They were hunting him too. The whole world suddenly felt like a cage. That night, they made a cold camp up in the rocks, a good ways from the ruin. Not a word was spoken. Jedediah's death lay between them like a heavy stone. Elias was grieving for his friend and for his own failure. Clara was just drowning in guilt, feeling like a plague on everyone she met. Elias took the first watch, sitting there with his rifle, staring into the dark. He had no plan and no one left to call. He was hurt, low on bullets, and looking after a woman hunted by a rich man's army. He must have drifted off. The deep ache in his side finally won. He was jerked awake by a scream. It was a sound of pure, gut-wrenching terror. Clara, he turned, rifle up, his heart hammering in his chest. She was standing there, her eyes seeing things that weren't there. "No," she was crying. "Please, not again, Luther." No, she was trapped back at the ranch. She was reliving that awful Brandon. "Clara," Elias said, his voice sharp, but she couldn't hear him. She stumbled backward from a phantom. Then his name tore from her throat. "Elias!" He was by her side in a flash, grabbing her arms. "Clara, wake up. You are safe." She fought him, her fists beating on his chest, her eyes still wild with terror. "Get off me! It is me! It is Elias!" His voice finally broke through the nightmare. Her eyes cleared. She saw his face, pale in the moonlight. And then she just broke. All the fight washed right out of her. She fell against him and wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on for dear life. This wasn't the tough woman who had patched him up. This was a terrified child. "Don't let them take me," she sobbed. Her voice was muffled against his shirt. "Please don't let them take me back. I cannot go back. I would rather die. I would rather you shot me." He stood there, stiff as a board, his hands by his sides. Elias was not a man who knew how to give comfort. He didn't know the words. She was shaking something fierce, her tears soaking his shirt. He could smell the clean soap in her hair. He knew he should push her away, just set her down and walk off, go back to his watch. The old Elias would have. But her words stuck with him. His own hands felt stiff and clumsy as he raised them. After a moment, he finally put his arms around her and just held on. He did not offer empty words or promises. Those would be lies. His arms were a steady comfort, an anchor in her storm. Clara leaned in closer, her crying finally starting to soften. Her heart was beating like a wild bird against his ribs. Then, out of nowhere, he wanted to kiss her. Just a small kiss on her head, to say something words could not. He felt useless just standing there like a fence post. But he stopped himself. A kiss now would be for him, not for her. It would be taking advantage, plain and simple. And that would make him no better than Luther Ray. So he just held on. His hand rested on her back, feeling the thin fabric of her dress. His hand brushed against the raised white scar through her shirt. His grip on her tightened, fierce and protective. It was as if he could hold her pieces together, as if his strength alone could undo her past. He didn't speak a word. He just held her close. And in that cold, dark place, Elias felt his own walls crumble. The high country wasn't welcoming. It just watched them with a cold silence. Elias pushed them higher, away from the flat valley floor. He knew Luther's men were the kind of trackers who could read the land. They could spot a turned stone or a broken twig from a mile away. But he reckoned even hired guns didn't have the stomach for this place. The granite peaks in late November were a different kind of to have a mane. The air grew thin, and the world turned to gray, unforgiving rock. The sky turned mean, a heavy iron gray over the pines. On their third day climbing, the snow hit them something fierce. It wasn't a gentle flurry, but a sideways blizzard driven by a screaming wind. "We have to stop, Elias," Clara yelled over the howling. She was shaken like a leaf, even wrapped in a thick bedroll. Their poor horse was struggling, chest deep in the heavy snow. Elias wiped ice from his lashes, squinting through the whiteout. That's when he spotted it, a dark shape half buried in the trees. It was an old hunter's shack, built from rough-cut logs. Looked like it had been abandoned for a good long while. "There," Elias pointed, and they pushed the old door in. It smelled of old campfire smoke and damp earth but blessedly, it was a shelter from that awful wind. There was a stone hearth and a rough platform for sleeping. Elias, being a good man, saw to the horse first. He rubbed the animal down and got it settled in a lean-to. His own side was a constant, throbbing ache, but the bitter cold seemed to numb the worst of it. For a week, that little shack was their whole world, buried under 3 feet of snow. Survival came down to 2 simple things: heat and food. Each morning, Elias grabbed his rifle and headed out into the storm. He ignored the pain in his side, hunting for rabbits or whatever he could find. He usually came back with something for the pot. His hands would be raw and his beard caked with ice. Back inside, Clara was the heart of their little shelter. She gathered firewood until her hands were too numb to feel. She patched the cracks in the walls with mud and moss, and she kept that little fire alive, treating it like it was precious. When the wind finally died at night, the silence was absolute. It was a quiet so deep Clara could hear the blood rushing in her ears. Then the wolves began their song, their howls rising from the valley. They sounded close, their mournful cries bouncing off the canyon walls. It was the sound of a hungry hunt. Clara pulled her blanket tighter. "Sounds like they're right on our doorstep," she whispered. Elias just cleaned his rifle. "They're a mile off, at least." "Sound just carries in the snow. They're hunting," she said. "Everything out here is hunting something," Elias replied, never looking up. They ate the small rabbit in silence. The meat was tough, but it was warm. Elias watched her. The firelight cast sharp shadows on her thin face. The bruises were fading, but the fear in her eyes was a permanent guest. It had just burrowed deeper, hiding behind the need to survive. "Tell me," she said, breaking the quiet. Elias paused. "Tell you what?" he asked. "About your brother," she said. "You said you were bleeding for a story you didn't know." "Well, I don't know yours. If we're going to die here, I want to know who I'm dying with." Elias put the bone down. He wiped his greasy hands on his pants. The fire crackled loudly. "His name was Daniel," Elias said, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. I hadn't said it out loud in a long, long time. "He was 20, 10 years younger than me." He stared into the fire. "We had a farm, good bottomland our daddy cleared himself. When he passed on, it became ours. It was all we had. Then the railroad men came through, said they needed our land. They offered us pennies on the dollar for our whole life's work. Clara saw the muscle jump in his jaw as he clenched his teeth. I told them no, Elias said, his voice hard as iron. I went to the law. Hired a lawyer with money we couldn't spare. I was a fool. I thought the law was for everyone, but it's not. The law belongs to the men with the money to buy it. The bank called our loan, then their hired men came for us. Men like Harkin tried to run us off our land. My brother Daniel caught them trying to torch our barn. A fight started, and Daniel had to shoot one of them. It was plain self-defense, but that did not matter. The sheriff was bought and paid for by Harkin. They sent a mob of 20 men for him instead of a trial. I took down 3 before they knocked me out cold. When I came to, my chest shuddering, the barn was gone. It was just ash, and Daniel was hanging from the cottonwood. Clara let out a small, wounded sound, reaching for him. I lost the land, Elias said, his voice just a hollow whisper. I lost everything. I hunted those men for 2 long years, but it did not bring him back. It just made me a drifter. A man who can't stop moving, or the ghosts get too loud. He looked at his scarred hands. I am no hero, Clara. I am just a man who failed the brother he swore to protect. Clara moved then, shifting on the floor and reaching out. Her hand covered his, rough but somehow gentle. Her touch felt electric. You did not fail me, she whispered. He looked at her hand on his, wanting to pull away to safety, but for once he did not. He slowly turned his hand over. He laced his own scarred fingers right through hers. He gave her hand one firm squeeze, then let go and stood up. He checked the door, turning his back to the fire and to her. The snow finally stopped 2 days later, leaving a bright stillness, but their supplies were dangerously low. Elias had been out tracking. He lost the trail and had to return to the little shack. He was frustrated and tired, his side aching something fierce. He pushed the door open. Clara, I could not find anything. He stopped dead. Clara was standing near the hearth. She had hung up a blanket. A rope was strung across the corner for a makeshift bath. A bucket of hot water sat there, ready for her. He had come back too soon. The blanket had fallen. She was turned away from him, bare to the waist. The firelight showed the gentle curve of her back, and it showed the bruises. They were everywhere. Dark marks on her ribs where Harkin had kicked her. Faded yellow handprints bruised her upper arms. And then he saw it, a raised, twisted scar on her shoulder. It was a brand, seared into her skin like she was livestock. The sight hit Elias like a punch to the gut. He saw a story of pain that felt just like his own. Clara gasped and spun around, grabbing a rag to cover herself. Her eyes were wide with fear. I didn't hear you come in, she whispered. Elias turned his back to her right away, his heart pounding. I'm sorry, he said, his voice thick. I didn't mean to. It's all right, she answered, her voice small. Just give me a minute. He stared at the door, gripping the latch so hard his knuckles turned white. He closed his eyes, but he couldn't unsee it. It was not her nakedness that haunted him. It was the sheer cruelty of what they had done to her. He stepped back out into the biting cold to give her privacy. He stood in the snow, trying to cool the rage burning inside him. When he finally went back in, the little shack felt different. The air was heavy with things they couldn't say. Clara sat by the fire, mending a tear in his shirt. She wouldn't even look at him. They ate their small meal of porridge and dried meat in total silence. Elias tried to read his little book of Psalms, but he could feel her watching him, and the words just wouldn't make sense. The air grew heavy, and things finally came to a head the next evening. The hunger was gnawing at them, making everyone's temper short. Elias just sat sharpening his knife, making a steady, scraping sound by the fire. Clara, though, was pacing like a caged animal. Back and forth, back and forth. Stop that, Elias finally muttered. You're just wasting energy. I can't just sit here, she snapped back. She stopped dead and faced him. You haven't even looked at me all day. Elias kept his eyes on the blade. I'm looking at this knife. You've been avoiding me since you saw it, she accused. Elias set the knife down. He looked up, his face tired. I was giving you your privacy, Clara. It is not about privacy, she cried, her voice rising with frustration. It's about what you saw. You saw that awful brand on my skin. I saw it, Elias admitted, his voice low and quiet. And now that is all you see when you look at me, she said, trembling. You see a victim. You see Luther Rare's property. Something broken. No, Elias said, standing up. I see a woman who is alive. I see the woman who fought 6 men all by herself. So why will you not touch me? The question just hung there between them. Elias looked frozen in place. Clara, you held me during my nightmare, she reminded him, stepping closer. But you held me like I was made of glass, like I would shatter. I am not glass, Elias. I am flesh and blood. I am still here. She took one more step, so close he could smell the pine on her skin. I am so tired of being owned, she whispered, her voice finally breaking. And I am tired of being protected. I just want to be chosen. I want you to see me, Elias, not the scars, but me. He looked down into her fiery eyes and saw her desperate need to be whole again. He felt the walls he had built around his own heart just turn to dust. You don't know what you are asking, he rasped, his voice rough. I am a man with nothing. I have no future to give you. I only have a hard life and a cold grave. I am not asking for a future, she said. She reached out, taking his rough hand and placing it over her heart. Tonight, she whispered, no more pretending, and rose up to kiss him. It was not a gentle kiss, but a desperate, hungry collision. For just a second, Elias tried to pull back, to be noble. But the need was a landslide he could not stop. With a low groan of surrender, his arms wrapped around her tight. He pulled her in, kissing her with a hunger that scared him. They stumbled backward together, falling onto the platform of furs. The cold room vanished, warmed by the firelight dancing on the walls. When he began to undress her, his hands were trembling. He peeled away the simple dress like he was unwrapping a priceless gift. This time he did not look away from her body. He saw her soft curves, and he saw the ugly, faded bruises. He lowered his head, but not to her lips. He kissed the bruise on her ribs. He gently kissed the yellowed mark on her arm, tracing a path of pain. His soft touch was trying to draw out all the hurt. Clara gasped his name, her hands gripping his shoulders. Then he saw it on her back, the twisted, hateful brand. Hot rage flared in his chest, but he pushed it down deep. He replaced that anger with pure, gentle devotion. He pressed his lips right to the scarred tissue of the brand. He kissed it again and again, his warm breath on the cold memory. His touch was a silent promise, saying, "You belong to you." She began to cry, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release, like a poison finally leaving her body. When he finally covered her body with his, it was not an act of taking. It was an act of giving, of healing. It was a slow, tender conversation without a single word. It was an act of giving. It was slow and intense. He moved slowly, watching her face the whole time. He wanted to be sure she was right there with him. Clara, he whispered like a prayer. I'm here, she whispered back. There in the firelight, they found a connection. Something beautiful and desperate that fought off the cold and the hunters. For the first time in a long, long time, Elias felt his heart thaw. And for the first time in her life, Clara felt truly free. They fell asleep tangled in furs, his arm holding her safe. Her head rested on his chest, his heartbeat the only sound. Elias dreamed of the farm, of green pastures. He saw Daniel laughing on the porch. But this time, Clara was there. She was smiling in the tall grass, with no bruises on her face. He woke up with the morning sun on his skin. The fire was just gray ash. He reached out for Clara's warmth. His hand only found cold fur. His eyes snapped open. He sat up in a flash. Clara was gone. The shack was empty. The silence felt all wrong. The bed beside him was cold and empty. He swung his legs over the side, ignoring the fire in his wound. Her dress was gone. Her boots were gone too. The water bucket lay on its side. On the rough wooden table, a stone held down a scrap of paper. He knew the page. It was from his own psalm book. His legs felt like lead as he walked over and picked it up. The words were small, scribbled with a piece of charcoal from the fire. It said, Elias, last night was the only real thing I have ever known. But I know your heart. You are a man who stays and fights to the end. If I stay, they will come, and you will fight them, and you will die. Just like they killed your brother. Just like they got your friend. I cannot be the reason you lose it all again. I am going back. I will turn myself in at Barren Ridge. Maybe then they will leave you be. Do not follow me. Please let me save you this time. Clara. Elias stared at the note, his hand slowly crushing the paper into a ball. He looked at the empty room, at the imprint of her body still in the furs. A sound of pure, raw fury tore from deep inside his chest. A roar of grief that shook the very dust from the rafters. He slammed his fist down on the table, the old wood cracking under the force. She had left to save him. She rode right back into the lion's den. He turned and buckled on his gun belt, his hands shaking with rage. He grabbed his coat. He grabbed his rifle. She thought she could trade her life for his peace. She was dead wrong. He kicked the door open, stepping out into the blinding white snow. The tracks were fresh, leading south, leading straight back to hell. Elias did not feel the cold. He only felt the fire burning in his soul. He ran to his horse, riding until its lungs burned. But he did not stop. He was not a man anymore. He was a vessel for a single cold purpose. His body screamed in pain, but he rode on south. He felt a warm patch beneath his coat, but paid it no mind. The wind cut his face and the snow blinded his eyes, but he could see her trail. She was taking the easiest way down, the fastest path back to the valley. Back to Barren Ridge. She was riding straight to her own demise. Her note felt like a stone in his pocket. I cannot be the reason you lose it all. But she was wrong. She was the only thing that mattered. He pushed his horse harder. He was a better rider and knew this land like his own hand. He cut across a ridge. The shortcut saved him 3 miles. He found her tracks again in a windswept pass. She was only an hour ahead, but he saw other tracks. 3 riders. Their horses were shod, and they were coming up from the south. They were on her trail. Elias stopped. The anger inside him turned to ice. It was a cold, precise feeling. The same one he'd felt hunting the men who took Daniel. This was no longer a rescue. This was going to be revenge. She rode for hours, numb and resolved. She had to find Harkin or Luther's top man. It was a simple trade, her life for Elias's. The canyon walls around her held every sound. Then she heard hoofbeats all around her. She pulled her horse to a halt, her heart pounding. Harkin rode out from the rocks, his arm in a sling. His face was a bruised and twisted mask of hate. "Well now," he growled, "look what we have here." 2 other men spread out, cutting off her escape. Her hand went to the empty holster on the saddle. No gun. She only had a small knife in her boot. "I surrender," she said, her voice shaking but loud. "Take me back. Just leave Elias out of this." Harkin let out a short, nasty laugh. "You think you can make deals? You just got him killed. We were already hunting him. You just saved us the trouble." He rode closer to her. "Luther wants you back." And his orders were not to be gentle. He backhanded her, a hard blow that sent her flying. She tumbled from the horse, hitting the frozen ground. She tasted blood. "Get up," he snarled, dismounting. "What about the gunman, Harkin?" one of them asked. "The fella who shot up the saloon." "He's buzzard food by now," Harkin spat, kicking snow at her. "Now let's tie her up. I'm going to enjoy this." He grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her head up. "You cost me my arm. I'm taking it out of your hide." He raised his good fist. Then a shot cracked the air. The sound echoed from the high canyon rim. Harkin's head just snapped back, a look of pure surprise on his face. A small, dark hole appeared right there on his forehead. He crumpled down across Clara's legs, gone before he hit the ground. "What in the devil?" the weasel-faced man yelled, fumbling for his own gun. Another crack echoed, and that man spun around, clutching his chest. He tumbled from his saddle like a sack of grain, his face a comical sight. The third man, full of panic, started firing his pistol wildly at the rocks. "Right here," a voice called out. It was Elias from behind a mess of boulders. The man turned, and Elias just stepped out into the open. He was right there. He had circled them, silent as a ghost in the snow, his face full of cold rage. His shirt was soaked through with blood, but he held his pistol steady. The outlaw raised his rifle, but Elias fired first. The man went down. A deep silence fell, with only the sharp smell of gunpowder in the air. Clara was gasping for air, pinned under Harkin's heavy body. "Elias!" she choked. He was by her side in a heartbeat, his eyes still scanning for any more danger. He pulled Harkin's body off of her, his own breath coming out in ragged gasps. He grabbed her arm and pulled her up. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his voice strained. "No," she cried. "But Elias, your side, you are bleeding." He glanced down at the dark stains spreading across the front of his coat. That last man's wild shot had gotten lucky, grazing his shoulder. But worse, it had torn his old side wound completely open again. "It is nothing," he said, but then his knees decided to buckle. He slid right down the canyon wall, the pistol dropping from his fingers. "Elias!" Clara screamed, scrambling over to him. He looked pale as a sheet. His lips were turning blue, and his sharp gray eyes were getting cloudy. "Get the horse," he wheezed, each word a struggle. She ran and grabbed the reins of the nervous animal, leading it to him. "I cannot ride," he whispered. "You will," she cried, frantic with fear. She tried to lift him, but it was like trying to lift a felled oak tree. "Clara," he gasped out, "you have to go. Take the horse and just ride. Here." "I'm not leaving you," she screamed, her tears freezing on her face. She stared at the blood pouring from his side. It was so much, staining the white snow a deep, shocking red. With shaking hands, she ripped long strips from her own dress. "Hold this," she ordered, pressing a wad of cloth into the wound. She wrapped the other strips tight around his body. He cried out from the pain, a raw, broken sound. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, trying to stop the bleeding. But there was too much. He was dying right in front of her. "Don't you die," she whispered, her voice low and fierce. She cradled his head in her lap, brushing ice from his hair. "You hear me, Elias? You don't have my permission to die." He looked up, his eyes struggling to see her. Her face was streaked with dirt and blood against the red rocks. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever laid eyes on. He slowly raised a hand, his glove dark with his own blood. He cupped her cheek, his touch ice cold. "Clara," he breathed. She wept, pressing her face into his hand. "I'm right here." He pulled her down for a weak, clumsy kiss. It tasted of blood and the end of everything. "You," he whispered, "were the only reason to live." Then his hand fell away and his eyes closed. "No," she shrieked. She shook him, but his head just rolled to the side. She pressed her ear to his chest and heard it. A faint, stubborn beat. He was alive. A wild strength filled her tin. It came from pure rage and the terror of losing him. She half-dragged, half-rolled his body onto the horse. He was a dead weight, moaning but not conscious. She slung him over the saddle like a sack of flour. Then she took the reins and looked back at the bodies of Harkin and the others. She stared at the crimson snow, then turned and began to walk. She led the horse out of the canyon and walked all through the night. Her thin saloon shoes were shredded, leaving her feet raw and bloody. But somehow she did not feel the cold, and she did not feel the pain. When the sun rose, she saw a small hill with a wooden cross on top. It was a mission. She pulled the horse that last half mile, her lungs burning. Clara stumbled into the courtyard and collapsed, still holding the reins. An old woman in a black habit was there, feeding her chickens. Her face was a map of wrinkles, but her eyes were clear as the desert sky. She looked at Clara, the horse, and the wounded man without a word. "Bring him inside," the nun said calmly, "and use the side door. You will frighten the children." In a small infirmary, the nun, Sister Terrace, cut away his clothes. Clara just could not bring herself to watch the awful sight. "He is alive," the nun said, her hands surprisingly strong. "This wound in his side is old and infected," she said, "but this one in his shoulder is new. The bullet went clean through." She handed Clara a bucket. "Go wash up, then find the chapel and pray." But Clara did not know how to pray. She went to the small, cold chapel. Her dress was still stained with Elias's blood. The room smelled of old stone and beeswax. She fell to her knees. She did not ask for forgiveness or pray for her own soul. She did not even know the right words to say. She just begged. "Don't take him," she whispered into the shadows. "Please, take me instead. Let him live. He is a good man. Please let him live." She knelt on the cold stone for what felt like hours until she was numb. Then she heard footsteps. It was Sister Terrace in the doorway. "I have done all I can do," the nun said softly. "He has a high fever. The next 12 hours will decide everything. The rest," she said, "is in God's hands." Clara slowly stood up. "I saw the mark on your—" "Hold on there, child," the nun said. Her eyes found the brand on Clara. "I know that mark." Clara just wept. "It is my fault he is dying." Sister Teasy was a quiet comfort. "You feel his pain," the nun began, "and he feels yours. Some men are just like that. It is their blessing and their curse. You find a man like that, you stay." Clara understood, and Elias lived. He fought a bad fever for 2 days. Clara never once left his side. He muttered about home in his sleep. Then he whispered her name, Clara. On the third day, his fever finally broke. He woke up and saw her asleep. He reached out, just touching her hair. She awoke with a start. "Elias, you are here," he rasped. "I am." She took his hand. "I am not leaving." For a week, the snow melted outside. They talked, but not of the chase. She spoke of her mother's garden. He spoke of the horses he had raised. A rider shattered their quiet peace. A loud prospector was in the yard. He was yelling news from town. "Barren Ridge is plumb wild," he hollered. "Luther Ray's men are on a tear. There is a bounty on a girl named Clara." Clara froze solid, and Elias's hand balled into a fist. $500, the old prospector said, spitting tobacco. "The poster is strange. It says to silence her, not just capture. She must be a witness. That kind of money will bring every gunman around." The color drained from Clara's face, but Elias was already pushing himself up. His jaw was set like stone. "He is not hunting a runaway," he growled. "He is silencing a witness." Clara turned from the window, her voice suddenly strong. "He is right. If I surrendered, Luther would have made sure I disappeared." "I am not just a runaway," she said, standing tall. "I am a thief." Elias watched, confused, as she reached into her simple gray dress. She pulled out a small packet, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine. "I made him think I was broken. He never guessed that I could read. My mother taught me letters and numbers." Her fingers deftly untied the twine, revealing a small leather ledger. "He keeps records of everything, Elias. He thinks it makes him smart." Elias leaned forward, ignoring the sharp pain from his wounds. Clara opened the book, and the pages were filled with secrets. His brow was wrinkled with worry. Clara reached into the front of her dress. It was a simple gray wool dress the nuns had given her, sturdy and plain. Her hand fumbled for a moment before pulling out a small oilcloth packet. It was no bigger than a man's palm, tied up tight with a piece of twine. "I didn't just run," she said quietly. "I waited. I let him think I was broken. Last month I was cleaning his office. He never for a second thought that I knew how to read." She sat on the stool across from him, the packet in her lap. "My mother taught me my letters and my numbers." She began to carefully unwrap the twine. Her fingers were steady. She laid the cloth flat and revealed a small leather book. "It's his ledger. He's a businessman, Elias, who keeps a record of everything. He is very careful. He thinks it proves how smart he is." Elias leaned forward. His wounds ached, but he didn't care. Clara opened the book. The pages were full of ink. The pages were filled with a tight, neat script, names, dates, and figures. "Look here," she said, her finger landing on a line. "June 10th, 1870. Miss Amelia, $100. Her finger slid down the page. "The Irish Sisters, $75 each." Elias felt a cold dread. Luther was buying girls, trafficking them from back east. Clara flipped a few pages. "And it gets worse." She showed him the land claims. "The Miller farm, signed over with a simple X. But look at this signature," she said, pointing. "It's perfect. It's Luther's own handwriting. He was forging claims, stealing land from honest folks." She looked up at him, her eye burning with a righteous fire. "He sold me. He branded me like cattle, but I took his whole filthy life from him. I stole his book." Elias stared at the ledger in his hands. It was a confession. It was proof. It was a death sentence for Luther. "Clara," he said, his voice rough, "he doesn't want you back. The bounty is for this book. Then we destroy it, she said, moving toward the stove. We burn it and we run. We can head for California, start over. No, Elias said, standing tall. That old fire was back in his eyes. It was the same fire she'd seen in the saloon and in the canyon. I've been running my whole life. I ran after they killed Daniel. Running doesn't work. They just find somebody else to hurt. His voice cracked. They found Jed. He took the book from her hand. This is what I never had, he said, feeling its weight. I tried to fight them with my fists. I tried to fight them with a gun, and I lost. He tapped the leather cover. This is a different kind of weapon. It's their kind of weapon. So what do? She asked, a sliver of hope in her voice. We don't run. We fight. But this time we use the law. There is no law here, she argued. Luther owns this whole county. He owns the marshals. Maybe so, Elias said, but he does not own the United States Army. There's a federal commander at Fort Trinity, 100 miles north of here. He has the authority to arrest Luther. If we get this book to him, it's over. 100 miles, Clara breathed, the dangerous journey ahead settling in. And every bounty hunter in the territory will be looking for you, Elias finished. It's a fool's choice, he warned. It's the only choice we have, Clara replied. She took the book, wrapped it back in the cloth, and tucked it safely in her dress. So when do we leave? Sister Terrace did not try to stop them. She just looked from Elias to Clara, and it seemed she understood completely. That horse is lame, she told him. Harkin's crew just ran it ragged. But y'all left 3 good ones. She gave them some corn and salt, and a couple of them warm blankets. For Clara, a pair of tough boy's boots, and a heavy wool coat. The old nun said, God might forgive you, children, but this desert surely will not. They rode north, just 2 small souls. Elias was still hurting bad, the ride taking its toll on him. But he sat tall in that saddle. Clara rode right beside him. Her face was set like stone, her eyes always searching the horizon. The land was hard country, a mess of dry gullies and canyons. They stayed clear of the main trails, where every rider was a threat. On the 3rd day out, the water was getting dangerously low, and the horses were just about done. Then they saw a little adobe town, just a trading post and 1 beat-up saloon. We have to, Elias said. We need water. Elias, no, she said. My face, the bounty. We'll go in at dusk. You keep your hat pulled down low. But that plan fell apart quick. The trading post was boarded up. The only light was from the saloon. Stay here, Elias told her. No, Clara said, getting down from her horse. I am not hiding. I am not a child. We go in together. He saw the fire in her eyes. He just gave a nod. The second they walked through those doors, the whole saloon went quiet. It was a filthy, smoky little room. 3 miners at a table stopped their card game cold. A lone prospector at the bar just stared into his glass. The barkeep, a huge fellow with 1 bad eye, stopped his work. Every single one of them was looking straight at Clara. That hat couldn't hide the fine shape of her face, or that she was a woman. And a woman sure didn't belong in a place like this. Elias walked to the bar. He kept his hand resting close to his pistol. Whiskey, a canteen of water, and a sack of oats. The barkeep stared at Clara, his 1 good eye taking a long, slow trip down her body. He spat a brown stream of tobacco juice on the floorboards. It landed just inches from her new boots. Water's $1. Oats ain't for sale. The barkeep growled, his nasty gaze landing back on Clara. But maybe we can trade something. Elias moved to block the man's view of her, the water, and the oats. Now. The barkeep just smiled, a slow, rotten kind of grin. I know you. He pointed a thick finger right at Clara. You're her from that poster. Luther Ray's runaway. Property. Clara flinched like she'd been struck. $500, the barkeep mumbled, picking up a heavy club from under the bar. That's a whole lot of money for a piece of used goods. That awful word just hung there in the stale air. Elias didn't raise his voice. He didn't draw his gun. He moved quicker than a blink, a terrifying, silent speed. His left hand shot out, grabbing the barkeep's apron and yanking him halfway across the bar. His right hand held a knife, and it was pressed right against the man's throat. The tip of the blade made a little dimple in the soft, greasy skin under his chin. "Hey now," the barkeep gurgled, his eye wide with pure panic. His club clattered to the floor. The miners in the back all raised their hands high. "Say it again," Elias whispered, his voice flat and cold as a tombstone. This wasn't the kind man from the mission. This was the hardened man from the canyon. This was the man who lost his brother Daniel. Clara knew he was about to kill him. He would cut this man's throat, and the law would hang him for it. "Elias," she said, her voice sharp and clear. She laid her hand on his arm, the one holding that knife. He didn't move a muscle. His eyes were still locked on the terrified barkeep. "Elias, no," she said, her voice softer now, but it was as hard as steel. "Let him go. He's not worth it." Elias was trembling. His whole body was a tight coil of fury. He wasn't seeing the barkeep anymore. He was seeing Luther. He was seeing the men who wronged his family. "He is nothing," Clara said again, her voice steady. "He's just talk," Clara said, her grip firm on his arm. "Let it go." Her voice broke through his rage. Elias stared at the barkeep's frightened face. With a hard shove, he sent the man stumbling backward. The barkeep crashed into the shelves, shattering bottles all around him. Elias didn't look back. He just grabbed Clara's hand and said, "Let's go." They walked out of that saloon and nobody dared to make a move. They rode hard until midnight when the land changed to the painted mesa. It was a strange place with massive red and purple rocks reaching for the sky. A lonely wind whistled through the canyons like a ghost. They were lost in the maze of trails, and their water was nearly gone. Elias felt the weight of it all, his wounds aching from the fight. The bitter taste of failure from the saloon lingered in his mouth. On their second day in that wasteland, they found him by a small fire. He was an old man with skin like worn leather, tending a few mules. He wore buckskin pants and an old cavalry jacket, a curious sight. Elias raised his rifle, but the old man didn't even flinch. He just pointed a thumb toward his fire. "The water here is bitter," the old man said, "but it won't kill you. Not like the men who are following you," he added. Elias and Clara froze. "You've seen them?" Elias asked, stepping closer but keeping his guard up. "Saw 3 riders about 2 hours back," the old man said. "They're on your trail." He finally looked up, his eyes clear and sharp. "You're running from a fella named Rye," he stated, like it was a fact. "He's put the word out, offering a handsome reward of rifles for your capture." "We are not running, Clara declared, her voice strong. "We're going to Fort Trinity." The old man looked her over, from her worn-out coat to her dusty boots. He saw the determination in her eyes and a slow smile cracked his face. "So you're the one," he said softly. "The woman who walked through fire." He stood taller and leaner than he first appeared. "I'm headed to the fort myself. The path ain't easy. I reckon I'll show you the way." Through a maze of canyons only he knew. He moved with a quiet purpose. They camped that night in a high cove, tucked away from the wind. Their guide, John Walks Alone, shared his simple meal with them. He and Elias talked low about the changing land. Clara just watched the old man, saying nothing. Before they slept, he walked over and held out his hand. In his palm was a heavy silver comb with a single turquoise stone. It was old Spanish silver, clearly valuable. "I cannot take this," Clara whispered, having nothing to trade. "This is a gift," he said softly. He placed it in her hand. "It belonged to my grandmother. She watched her world fall apart, then built another from the ruins." His kind eyes met hers. "It belongs with someone who walked through fire." Clara gripped the cold silver, her own eyes filling with tears. Later, when John was asleep, Elias joined her. They lay a little ways off, looking up at the night sky. The stars out here were not just lights. They were a river of dying moons. It felt like you could just reach out and grab a handful of them. The air was cold and sharp. She held the silver comb tightly. "He knows," Elias said quietly. "He knows what this is all about." "He saw me," Claire whispered back. "Not the brand. Just me." Elias turned to look at her, her face soft in the starlight. The hard lines and bruises had faded. She was just Clara again. "We might not get away, Elias," she said, her voice trembling. "They will find us." Elias did not lie. "I know they will." She met his gaze. Then I am glad I am here with you, even if tomorrow is our last day on this earth. Her hand reached up, gently tracing the scar on his face. Being with you, she said, is the only time I have ever felt free. His heart, a thing he thought long dead, ached in his chest. He leaned in close and kissed her, gentle and slow. This kiss was nothing like the desperate one in the canyon. It was slow, it was deep, a promise made under a river of stars. There on the cold red sand, they shared something true. In a world full of cruelty and greed, this one night was the only thing that truly belonged to them. They were not property, just two souls finding a home. They were only 2 days from Fort Trinity when the ambush hit. They were riding in a narrow pass, the traitor just ahead. A rifle shot echoed and John Walks Alone's mule dropped. "Bounty hunters!" Elias yelled, pulling Clara from her horse and behind some rocks. He saw 3 men, not Luther's crew, just hired guns. They had been lying in wait. "Give us the girl," one of them shouted. "We just want the girl. The Indian can go." "Go to hell," Elias yelled back, firing his rifle. "Clara, you stay down," he ordered her. "They've got John pinned," she cried. The old man was trapped. "I see him," Elias said. The fight was quick and ugly. Elias was a fine shot but outnumbered. He winged one of them in the arm. "I'm going to draw their fire," Elias gritted out. "When I do, you run for it. I am not leaving you. That's an order, damn it." He broke from cover. He was firing as he ran, trying to get a better angle. It was a trap. A 4th man Elias hadn't seen stepped out from behind him. The man slammed his rifle butt into Elias's head, and the world went white. "No!" Clara screamed as 2 men grabbed the dazed Elias. He was bleeding badly from his head. The leader of the group, a big fella, grabbed Clara. "We got her," he yelled. "That's $500. What about him?" another man asked, pointing at Elias. The leader spat on the ground. "He's trouble. String him up. Leave him for the buzzards. It will serve as a message." Clara fought like a wildcat, but the man was too strong. She watched in horror as they tossed a rope over a branch. They tossed the rope over a dead pine branch and cinched the noose tight on Elias. He was awake, struggling weakly with his hands tied. Clara sobbed, "No, please, take me instead." "Somebody shut her up," the leader ordered, then turned back to Elias. "Any last words, cowboy?" Elias just looked at Clara, his eyes clear and full of sorrow, but no fear. The man kicked the horse and Elias fell. The rope snapped tight. A terrible scream tore out of Clara, a sound of pure heartbreak. Elias was choking, his body twisting in the air. His boots kicked at nothing. His face was turning a dark, awful purple. He was dying right in front of her, just like Daniel. The leader holding her just laughed. "He's a pretty good dancer, ain't he?" And in that moment, something inside Clara just broke. The man who'd hit Elias had set his rifle down to watch the show. He was grinning like a fool, watching Elias struggle for his life. Elias's own pistol lay there in the dust where it had fallen. Quick as a snake, Clara stomped her heavy boot, the one from Sister Teres, onto the man's foot. He howled in pain, and his grip loosened for just a heartbeat. That was all the time she needed. She lunged for Elias's pistol in the dirt. The grinning man saw her and went for his own gun. Clara fired. The pistol kicked hard in her hand. The shot went wild, hitting a rock near the man's head. Elias was still fighting, with only seconds left. Clara steadied the gun. She used both hands, aiming just like Elias had taught her, but not at the men. She aimed for the rope. Her second shot missed. The leader was pulling his own pistol. "You crazy woman," he yelled. Clara took a deep breath. She looked past the men, right at Elias, at the rope strangling the life out of him. She saw the man who had kissed her scars, who had saved her from nightmares. She saw her future. She fired a 3rd time. She missed the rope again. But she hit the bounty hunter standing right beside it, the one with the greedy grin who tied the knot. The bullet took him square in the chest. He looked down, completely surprised. Then he just fell over. Clara didn't even watch him fall. She just turned the gun on the leader. The man froze, his hand hovering over his pistol. "Let him down," Clara commanded, her voice as cold and hard as a river stone. Her hands were shaking something fierce, but she kept that barrel dead steady. "Or what, little lady?" he sneered. "You ain't got the stomach for..." A gunshot sent bark flying just inches from his head. He yelped, dropping his gun, and they scrambled to cut Elias down. Elias collapsed in a heap, gasping, with a raw red rope burn around his neck. "Get on your horses and ride," she ordered, "or I swear I'll put you both in the ground." They galloped away in a cloud of dust, leaving their fallen partner behind. Clara looked at the man she had shot, his eyes staring empty at the big Texas sky. She felt no tears, just a cold resolve as she ran to help Elias. Hours later, they stumbled into Fort Trinity, looking like something from a nightmare. "We need to see the commander," Clara yelled, her voice raw. "We have proof about Luther Ray." A clean-faced soldier tried to turn them away, but her fierce desperation made him fetch the commander. They were led into a warm office where a man in a crisp blue uniform sat behind a desk. And in the chair across from him, holding a glass of whiskey, was the last man they ever expected to see. His throat was too torn up to make a sound. John Walks Alone cut his ropes. They finally made it to Fort Trinity. A couple hours later, Clara arrived. She and the old traitor dragged Elias through the gates, a sorry sight. They were covered in blood, dust, and gunpowder. "We need the commander," Clara yelled, her voice raw. "We have proof who ended Luther Ray." A fresh-faced soldier in a crisp uniform looked down on them. "The commander's busy." "We have his ledger," she begged. "Is there a federal man here? Anyone?" Her fierce desperation must have moved him, because the young soldier finally gave in. "Y'all wait here," he said, and returned a few minutes later. "Commander Wilhuff will see you now." They were led to a proper wood-frame office. Clara held that ledger like it was her own child. Elias leaned hard on the traitor. A nasty purple rope burn scarred his throat. They were led inside the office. It was warm, with a fire crackling away. A man in a clean blue uniform sat at a big desk, and right across from him, holding a cup of coffee, sat the devil himself. The man with the brandy was Luther Ray, smiling in a fine tailored suit. "Well now, Commander," he said smoothly, "my lost property has arrived with her kidnapper." The commander, a man with cold, bureaucratic eyes, asked, "Is this the woman, Mr. Ray?" "It is," Luther said, his eyes locking on to Clara. "You've caused me a heap of trouble, my dear." Clara's voice shook as she threw his ledger on the desk. "This man is a killer. The proof is in here." But the commander completely ignored the book and just looked at Luther. Luther sighed. "Like I told you, the girl's unwell. She stole my accounts and ran off with that outlaw." He slid a stack of crisp legal papers across the desk. "I have the bill of sale and the warrant for his arrest." The commander glanced at the papers, then at Clara's wild hair and the rope burn on Elias's neck. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "I have a legal warrant. All you have is a wild story and a stolen book. You'll have to go with Mr. Ray." He nodded to the two soldiers at the door. "Escort her to Mr. Ray's custody and hold this man in the stockade." But it wasn't a stockade. Commander Wilhuff did something worse. He simply evicted them from the fort. That's when John Walks Alone stepped between them and the soldiers, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He stated that he, a friend to the fort, had witnessed the bounty hunters attack himself. Faced with a political mess and Luther's smug paperwork, the commander found a compromise. He looked at the papers, then at Clara and Elias, and made his decision. Her wild hair and bloody clothes meant nothing next to a legal-looking document. He looked at the rope burn on Elias's neck, and then back at the warrant. "Ma'am," the commander said, his voice final, "all I have from you is a wild story. I'm afraid you'll have to go with Mr. Ray." He gestured to the two soldiers. "Escort Miss Wainwright to Mr. Ray's custody and hold this man in the stockade." But it wasn't a stockade. It was just the frozen, wind-blasted earth outside the gates. Commander Wilhuff had not imprisoned them. He had done something much worse. He had evicted them, leaving them to the elements and to their enemies. But then, John Walks Alone stepped between them and the soldiers, his voice a low rumble. He had not yelled. He simply stated that he, a friend to the fort, had seen everything. He witnessed the attack by the bounty hunters with his own two eyes. He told them the rope burn on Elias's neck was certainly not a fantasy. Faced with a political problem and Luther Ray's legal confidence, the commander found a compromise. The commander declared it a civil matter, not a military one, and took the ledger. He called it disputed evidence. Then he told Elias, "You are not welcome at Fort Trinity." Wilhuff's voice was cold as ice, and the woman admits she is a runaway. "I will hold these papers until the circuit judge arrives in 3 weeks. For now, you are banished from this post." He even gave back Elias's rifle. It was a final insult, as if to say they were no threat at all. So there they sat, 100 yards from the gate, their 3 horses chewing on dead grass. John Walks alone had given them his last blanket and a little cornmeal. He'd ridden off into the dark, his face a mask of pure sorrow. "You carry a heavy truth," he'd warned them. "Don't let the wind steal it." But now that cold wind was all they had. Clara buried her face in her hands. Her whole body ached, her throat was raw, but it was her hope that was shattered. "It's over," she whispered, her voice completely empty. "We did everything. I even took a life for nothing. He has the ledger. He has the law on his side. He has it all, and we have nothing left." She looked over at Elias. He was just staring at the fort, at the chimney smoke. That rope burn on his neck looked like a raw red necklace. He looked like a man cut down from a hanging, only to be left to freeze to death. "We came here thinking the law was a fortress," she said, her voice thick with tears. "But it's just another one of his ranches. He owns the law too." Elias never looked away. He just watched the soldiers march across the yard. Parade grounded, he watched a new family's wagon, loaded down with all their belongings, roll right on through the gates. "No," he rasped, his throat raw. "He don't own it. He's just a renter." "Elias," Clara pleaded, it is over. We have to run." "Run where?" he finally asked, his face a mask of pure exhaustion. But his eyes were not dead. They were burning with a fire I had not seen before. "To California? To Oregon? There is a man like Ray everywhere we go. Another land grabber just waiting for us." He pushed himself to his feet, every muscle aching, and looked out over the fort. "I have been running my whole life, Clara, ever since Daniel. I told myself I had nothing to fight for, but I was just plain scared. I am tired of being scared." "But we cannot fight the army," she cried. "We have no proof, Elias. We have nobody on our side." "We have the truth," he said, "and we have them." He pointed toward the fort. He nodded at the wagons, the merchants, all the regular folks. "That commander," he said, "he is just one man following orders. He sees papers and he sees authority. He does not see the people, but they are here and they are watching." His mind was working now, that old anger turning into a sharp idea. Remember what that old prospector said? That Ray was tearing up Barren Ridge. "Looking for me, he is turning this whole territory upside down." "Which means," Elias went on, his voice getting stronger, "all these homesteaders and miners, they are getting mighty tired of him. They are scared and they are angry. They just need someone to speak up." "What are you saying?" Clara asked, a little flicker of hope in her eyes. "The commander said a judge is coming in 3 weeks. But forts like this, they have a public hearing every single week. It is a place for folks to air their complaints. It is just a formality, sure. But it is a public space." He looked right at her. "We do not need a commander, Clara. We need a jury. That ledger is for the people, not him." "But Wilhelhoff has it," Clara said, her hope all gone. "He has a ledger," Elias corrected, opening his coat. His shaky hand reached carefully toward his wounded side. He pulled out a small packet, stained dark with blood. "You had it?" she gasped. "And you let me send him away?" "He got my supply book," Elias whispered with a tired grin. "It's just an old list of my bullets and flour. Looks close enough in the dark to a man in a hurry." Clara stared at him, then let out a laugh that was half a sob. "You magnificent rascal," she said. "You knew he would turn us away." "I know men like Wilhuff," Elias said, his face hard. "They do not look for the truth. They just look over the easiest road to take." He handed her the real ledger. "So we will give them the truth in a place where they flat out cannot ignore it. Tomorrow. The public hearing is on Tuesday, right there in the courthouse. But Elias, they will arrest us the second we set foot in that gate. Not if they do not know it is us. They use their last few coins for a disguise. They traded a story about bandits for an old, stained dress for Clara. She also got a pair of spectacles with a crack in one lens. Elias got a beat-up straw hat to go with his bruised face. The next morning, they looked like two more folks beaten down by this hard country. Clara pulled her hair back in a tight bun under a faded old bonnet. The cracked glasses hid her pretty eyes, making her look plain and meek. Elias, in that straw hat, looked like a dirt farmer who had been through the ringer. He looked like he had lost a good argument with a mule. They hid the horses in some trees and joined the stream of people heading to the fort. The new soldier at the main gate of Fort Trinity barely gave them a look. He just waved them through along with all the other folks. The fort was a bustling little town with a brand new pine courthouse. People were already crowding inside the building. It was full of homesteaders, merchants, and a few nervous prospectors. Up at the front, on a raised platform, sat Commander Wilhoof. He and two other officers looked bored plumb out of their minds. They were just ready to get through another morning of petty complaints. They expected stories about stolen chickens and property lines. Clara's hands were ice cold. She clutched the ledger hidden in her coat. "I cannot do it," she whispered at the door. "Elias, my legs will not move." Elias took her arm, his grip firm. "You have walked through fire. This is just a short walk. You walk through snow with bleeding feet. You can walk through this door." He guided her in, and they stood quietly in the shadows at the back. The commander called a name, Ephraim Stroud. A man stood up to complain about the price of hay. "He's not here," Clara whispered, scanning the faces. "Luther's not here." "He will be," Elias said calmly. "He wouldn't miss this show." Just then the door opened. In walked Luther Ray. He had two hard-faced men with him, looking expensive and mean. Luther smiled and nodded at the commander as if he ran the whole town. He sat in the front row, looking like a concerned citizen. Clara felt a cold terror grip her heart, and she froze. She started to turn away, but Elias put a steady hand on her shoulder. "Look at me," he commanded in a low voice. She looked into his eyes. She saw the man who had faced down danger for her time and again. The man who had kissed her scars and promised her safety. "I'm right here," he said. "I am not leaving. Now go." She took a deep breath and stepped out from the shadows. Her boots made a soft, steady sound on the floor. The commander looked up, irritated. "Ma'am, you are not on the list." Luther Ray turned in his seat, and then he saw her. His confident smile faltered. He saw the woman he thought he had destroyed. "I cannot wait," Clara said, her voice shaky at first. She took another step closer, standing tall and taking a breath. Then her voice rang out, clear and strong, silencing the room. "I am Clara Wright, and I am here to report a murder." The entire room went silent. The commander stood up. "Ma'am, I told you yesterday," he began. "You told me I was unwell, Commander," Clara cut in, her voice like ice. "You called me a liar, but these people here know the truth." She pulled the ledger from her coat as Luther Ray leaped to his feet. "This is an outrage," Ray yelled. "Commander, this woman is my servant and a thief." "And I have your papers right here, Mr. Ray," Clara shot back, holding up his ledger. Her hands were shaking, but she held that book high for all the folks to see. "This is his book of secrets," she cried out, "where he tracks the lives he buys and sells." "Lies," Ray shouted in a panic. But Clara paid him no mind. She looked at the faces in the crowd, seeing women just like her and good farmers. "August 10th, 1870, she read, her voice filled with a righteous fire. "The Miller farm faked the land claim, all for a single bottle of whiskey." A man in the back cried out, "That was my neighbor's place." "September 1st, Clara went on, her voice getting stronger. "Jado Diaz Stone. Payment to a hired gun for silencing him, $100. "It's not true," Ray roared. "Arrest her, she's mad." "Am I?" Clara challenged. "What about the women, Luther?" She turned another page. "June 10th, Miss Amelia, $100. "June 21st, the Irish sisters, $75 apiece." A woman nearby started to sob. "That's enough," the commander yelled, pulling out his sidearm. "Soldiers, you arrest this woman for disturbing the peace." "And what about the man I put down?" Elias's voice cut through all the noise. He stepped out from the shadows, his hands held up high. His eyes were locked on Luther Ray. "You, sir," the commander said, pointing his gun at Elias. "You are banished and you are under arrest." "That I am," Elias said, his voice calm. "I'm a banished man. But this woman," he motioned toward Clara, "she stopped a bounty hunter. A man sent to hang me on this land. And he was collecting a bounty put out by him." Elias pointed a finger at Luther Ray. Then he touched the ugly rope burn on his own neck. He also put $500 on her head just to keep her quiet. "That's the kind of man you're protecting." The whole room was on its feet now. Shouts of "shame" and "murderer" filled the air. Ray's face was a mask of pure rage. He saw his whole world, all his power, just dissolving right in front of him. His hand reached inside his tailored coat. "No!" Elias yelled. He was too far away to stop him. But a man in the front row had other ideas. Just then a man in a simple, dark suit stood up. "I would not do that, Mr. Ray," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He opened his coat, showing everyone a simple silver star. "The name is Marshal Bentine," he announced to the silent room. "I have been sitting here for 2 days listening to stories about you. I am here to investigate the death of Jedediah Stone." Luther Ray froze. The marshal continued, "This good woman's testimony? Along with that ledger, well, I reckon it is more than enough." Ray moved like a cornered animal and pulled out his pistol. He aimed the small gun not at the lawman, but right at Clara. He fired, but Elias was already moving, shielding Clara with his own body. The bullet tore into his old shoulder wound, spinning him completely around. He crashed into her, and both of them fell hard to the floor. The courthouse erupted. "Do not move, Ray," the marshal yelled. But Ray was already running for the side door, with his men providing cover. They drew their guns, and the soldiers finally raised their rifles. "Drop your weapons!" Shots rang out, filling the room with smoke. When it all cleared, Luther Ray and his men were down for good. The marshal and several settlers were all holding smoking pistols. The terrible reign of Luther Ray was finally over. Clara cradled Elias's head, crying, "Oh, not again. Please, not again." He smiled through the pain. "He just hit the old wound," he gasped. "It surely hurts like heck." Marshal Bentine knelt right beside them. "Son, that was the bravest and most foolish thing I have ever seen." Elias just grunted as Clara tended to his shoulder. "No," Bentine said, looking at the ledger. "I reckon it was the right thing to do." After that day, Fort Trinity started to become a different place. Commander Will Huff was confined to his quarters, pending a full investigation. Marshal Bentine took temporary command of the entire fort. Clara and Elias's testimonies, with that ledger, unlocked a dozen other crimes. The bounty on her and the reward for Luther Ray now belonged to Clara. A couple of weeks later, she stood in the marshal's office. Elias was with her, his arm in a sling, but looking much better. "That's a heap of money, ma'am," Bentine said, pushing it over. $1,500. You can start fresh anywhere. Go back east, maybe San Francisco." Clara just stared at the paper. It was a fortune. It was her freedom. But she pushed it right back. "I'm not going anywhere like that," she said, looking at a map. "I want to buy land," she declared, pointing to the mountains. It was a valley John Walks Alone had told them about. He said the water was sweet there, and the wind was gentle. Months passed. Their new pine cabin was halfway finished. The roof wasn't on yet, but the home was all theirs. It sat near a cold creek with aspen trees all around. Elias worked the logs, his shoulder healed and strong. He wasn't a drifter anymore. He was building his own home. Clara stepped out of the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. She was pregnant, her body strong and her face full of peace. Her long, honey-colored hair flowed freely down her back. The bruises and the fear were long gone. Only a faint scar remained. But her eyes held nothing but the future. She held the silver comb. It was the gift from John Walks Alone. She smiled, feeling its weight. With a steady hand, she swept her hair up and pinned it in place. Elias stopped his work just to watch her, his heart near to bursting. He felt a love so strong it nearly brought him to his knees. "Clara, come over here. You've got to see this sunset." She walked across their land as the sky blazed with color. But she wasn't looking at the sky. She was looking right at him. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat. Then she rose on her toes and kissed him with all her heart. desperation. That was not a kiss to say thanks. It was a kiss that said she was finally home. She leaned back, her forehead resting on his, her eyes looking deep into his soul. I don't have to pretend anymore, she whispered, her voice full of a love as wild and wide as the Texas sky. I'm all yours now. Thank you all for listening to this story from Wild West. We truly appreciate you spending your time with us. We would be mighty pleased to know where you are all listening from, so please drop a comment down below and let us know. Your thoughts mean the world to us. If you enjoyed this tale, we'd be honored if you'd subscribe to our channel. Here at Wild West, we have plenty more stories of the frontier for you, and we look forward to hearing from you in the comments.